As you recall, I first introduced macros in an earlier training video titled Advanced Filter, and I did it because it was very helpful when it came to using that feature, and I strongly recommend that you watch it. But know that this is the formal introductory training video on macros. Now, having said that, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what is a macro? A macro is a quick, easy solution to cut down on repeating a task over and over again by recording it just once, and then saving it as a macro, and then executing that saved macro again and again like lightning with a single click of a button or using shortcut keys. So for example, I've got my workbook here, and on each worksheet within the workbook I have a total of 5 worksheets. I've got the title of the worksheet, so there's Arizona, click on California, and New York, and so on. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and format the titles of each of my worksheets in cell A1 on each worksheet, make it bold, big, bad, and beautiful. And to do that, instead of going to sheet 1 and applying all the different formats, then to sheet 2 and 3, just go ahead and do it on 1, record it, and then once you have it saved, you can go ahead and execute that really quick, like with shortcut keys. So to record my steps, like changing the formatting for cell A1 for the title of this worksheet, Arizona, you can do it one of many ways. You can either come up here and click on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on the Macros drop-down arrow, and there it is, Record Macro. You can click on it there, or if you have the Developer tab, as you recall in an earlier training video, you right-click on the ribbon, and you check to bring up the Developer tab if you don't have it. And then you can just come over here to the Code group and click on Record Macro, or you can come down here on the status bar, and there it is right there. And you can see when I hover over it, it says no macros are currently recording. Click to begin recording a new macro. So click on any one of those 3, click on it, and there we go. First of all, we need to give it a name, maybe assign a shortcut key to it, give it a description. Then when we click OK, it records the steps, not the time. So take as long as you want. In any case, let's go ahead and give it a name because macro 1 doesn't tell me what the macro is going to be used for. And it's going to be called Format Titles because we're formatting the titles of all our worksheets. And I use the underscore to give it the illusion of having some space because I don't like to cram everything together because macro names do not like characters, and that includes spaces. So I gave it the underscore. Otherwise, you can get rid of the underscore and just keep it all together. Next is the shortcut key. If you want to assign it a shortcut key, well, if you do Control P, that's for print. It's already being used. I don't want to do that. Maybe Control M, or better yet, if you're running out of control clicks of any letter, you can hold down the Shift key and then hit the letter like maybe M. Hey, look at that. So now you have 3 that you have to hit at once to be able to execute this macro, Control, Shift, and M. Alright, next store the macro in this workbook, or the other choices are a new workbook. So when I click OK, after I select new workbook, it opens up a new workbook for me to store the macro in. Or the personal macro workbook. Now that's a hidden workbook that opens when you start Excel and makes the code you copy in this workbook available in all your workbooks. Let's go ahead and keep it simple and say it's going to be this workbook and give it a description. You can make it really descriptive and saying, okay, we're applying this format, the color magenta, make it size 50, or something generic like applying formats to title of worksheets. Sound good? Click OK and it's recording. Okay, don't move. No, I'm kidding. It doesn't record time, but it records your steps. So when you're recording and you go through the steps and you're done, you can click on stop either down below on the status bar. You can see it says a macro is currently recording. Click on it to stop, or you can come up here if you have the developer tab, changes from record to stop, or go to the view tab, click on macros, and it changed from recording to stop, so you can stop it in any one of those 3 areas. In any case, it's recording steps, and you can see that I already have the cell that I want to apply the formatting to selected, so I don't have to jump to it. And if I did, it wouldn't matter because it's recording not where it's coming from, but where it's going to. So if I made a mistake in my recording, I'm like, oops, no, wait a second. It recorded all those clicks. So let me go back to Arizona. So should I stop it and re-record again? Well, that's up to you, but the macros, when they're executed, they go through so fast you won't see it jumping around from one cell to the next until you get to the cell that you actually want to apply the formatting to, so I'll leave it as is, and you'll see that in just a minute. So let's go ahead and apply formatting to it. Come up here, click on the Home tab. Let's make it red, and let's change the size to 20. And the font type, let's type in mono. There we go. Hit enter, monotype Corsiva. Ooh, that's pretty. And that's it for me. So let's come down here on the status bar and click stop, and we're good. Now that we have the macro recorded, we can go to the next worksheet and run the macro. And we can do it one of, well, at least 3 ways. The fourth way was to create a button and assign the macro to it, which we went over in the advanced filter training video, so I won't cover that here. The other 3 ways is to use a macro button that's already been created, use the shortcut keys, Control-Shift-M, or to go ahead and just run it from, well, either up here on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on the Macros drop-down arrow, and click on View Macros, and you can see that's where it's sitting in this container here, the macro window, and you can click on Run, and it'll run it. But if I click on Run now, it's going to apply to the headings here that I have selected for the columns, quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4, so don't want to do that. And so if you try to select it here, it thinks that we got a new macro name. You can see the marching ants. We don't want to do that, so you have to click Cancel and select the cell before you run it. And again, you can view the macros here, go to the Developer tab, view the macros here. You're pulling it up to be able to select it. Make sure you got the right macro selected. We only have one, so okay, that's not going to be an issue. And then click Run, and hey, there we go. So next, for New York, again, the other way we can do it is the shortcut keys, Control-Shift-M. Oh, nice. And then finally, let's go to Utah and select the cell, is that you can actually customize the Quick Access toolbar and add the macro to it. You can click on it to run it as well. So right-click anywhere on the Quick Access toolbar, go down to Customize the Quick Access toolbar, change it from Popular Commands to Macros. And we just have one macro. It's the Format Titles. Double-click to add it over to the right, but I don't know about you. That icon's just not doing it for me. So with it selected, let's go ahead and modify it and have a happy face, the symbol representing it, so you don't get that funny little thing up there on the Quick Access toolbar. And then for the display name, you can be a little bit more descriptive when people hover over it to find out the purpose of that happy face. We can say, Formats Titles of Worksheets, click Okie dokie. Looks good, click OK. There he is. Let's go ahead and hover over him to see the display name. Format Titles of Worksheets, great. Click on him and, ooh, that was slick. Now you need to know that when you create macros from a basic Excel workbook, when I say basic, look up here on the title bar, the extension .xlsx, that's the default macro workbook, the extension thereof. And if you want to learn more about extensions, how to see them, how to hide them, what they mean, and the problems you can run into, then watch my Windows training video on extensions. But in any case, macros will not be saved unless it's a macro-enabled workbook. So you have to change it and save it to 1, which the extension will be XLSM for macro. Otherwise, you'll lose the embedded macro code, and I don't want to lose it. I want to hold on to it. And the reason being is because macros are a prevalent tool for transferring computer viruses. So Excel requires that all workbooks with macros to be saved in the XLSM extension, the format, to provide increased security. So to do that, let's go ahead and just click on Save and see what happens. And it warns you, it says, hey, we can't save this in macro-free workbooks. You can either go ahead and continue and save it in this workbook, which means you lose the macro, it deletes it, we won't do that. Or you can click No, and it opens up the Save as Type window for us to go ahead and change the type from the basic XLSX. Click on it, and let's go to the macro-enabled workbook, which is right there. Excel macro-enabled workbook, XLSM, macro. And then once we change it, we can go ahead and save it. And then it says, be careful, parts of your document may include personal information that can't be removed by the document inspector. As you recall in the properties training video, if you want to add the author or more details to the properties, it may not clear out. So after you save it and click Okie dokie, you may want to come up here and go Backstage File, Info selected by default. Let's come over here and click on Show All Properties, and there's the hyperlink-based videotrainingpro.com. Click on Properties to Advanced Properties, see if there's any additional details that I don't want to be included. In any case, you can go ahead and check for issues and inspect the document. And I'm looking at it right here, Document Properties and Personal Information. So when I click on Inspect, it says it found some. You can go ahead and click Remove All, and then click Close. And it looks like the hyperlink base is still staying there on my website, in which case I may want to remove it manually. It's probably a good idea to double check. Sometimes if you just save and close out and reopen it, it will be removed. But again, it did give us the warning saying it may not have been removed. In any case, you want to keep an eye on that. And we'll talk about the document inspector in a later training video, but we already went over it briefly here in this training video. So once we save it to the desktop, let's go ahead and close out. And it wants to know if we want to save it. I mean, we already saved it. It's on the desktop. But if I click save, it says, be careful. It keeps giving me that warning. That's fine. And we'll cover the document inspector in another training video, but we went over it briefly here, and that's okay. It's important that we do. Click OK. And hey, look at this. Which one of these is not like the other? Like I said, with the extensions, you can see there's XLSX and XLSM. Again, you can watch my Windows training video on it if you can't see yours in your Windows operating system. But I can see mine, and if you can't see them, you can look at the icon, because this one has the exclamation point. And you can see when I hover over it, that means it's macro enabled. It's like exclamation point, da-da, something's going on here. You sure you want to open this up? Because if it has a macro in it, and you got this from somebody who meant to do harm, it could destroy your computer. Those macros can be programmed to do a lot of damage and harm to your computer. And then, of course, over here you get no exclamation point, no warning. Now, in earlier versions of Excel, it had the macros saved in the basic worksheet. So you may want to be careful when you open up those as well. And in fact, when it comes to editing the macro, I'll show you the macro security, how you can enable it in case if you get a worksheet that was created in an earlier version of Excel that has a macro in it that you think, oh, it's just a regular worksheet or workbook. It's not in the latest versions of Excel where it separates the two, then we can say, look, just disable all macros from any workbook that I open. That's going to be your safest bet. Now, as I mentioned, macros can contain harmful viruses or bad code that can destroy your computer. So if you're concerned about accidentally opening up a workbook that contains a macro, you can disable them. And to do that, you want to open up Excel, double-click. Don't open up the macro-enabled workbook to disable it, because if that's got a virus in it, it would destroy your computer before you could disable it, right? Let's come up here and click on the File tab to go backstage, down to Options. Go ahead and click on Trust Center. Then come over here and click on Trust Center Settings. And then go over and click on Macro Settings, and whoopsie doodle, I did a no-no. I had Enable All Macros, which isn't recommended because it could be dangerous if somebody sends you a workbook that contains the bad code. So the other options you get is you can disable all macros without notifications, so that way you open up any workbook, it's not going to have those macros running. Or you can disable with notifications, saying, okay, you open up a workbook, we do have macros, do you want to enable them? You get the choice. And then you can disable all macros except for digitally signed macros. And digitally signed are those from trusted sources, or at least we hope. In any case, that's my disclaimer. So choose which one works best for you. And as an example, if I choose disable all with notification, let's see what that looks like. Select it, click OK, click OK. And you have to close out of Excel before the changes can take effect. And then go ahead and open it back up, or like the macro-enabled workbook. And it says, hey, you've been warned. Do you want to go ahead and enable the content? If you choose yes, and it's a bad code, whoopsie doodle. Or you can go ahead and close out of here and say, well, let me ignore this session. Don't enable it. I just want to close out of it so I don't see the warning. Then when you close out of here and you open it back up again, you get the warning again, in which case you can go ahead and enable it and say, yeah, I trust it, in which case you can use the macros in it. And when you close out of it and you open up the same workbook after you enabled it, it's not going to give you the warning again because now it's a trusted document. Excel automatically figures if you enabled it that it's going to be trusted from here on out. But if you want to change that, you can come up here, click on the File tab, go backstage down to Options, go to Trust Center, to Trust Center Settings, and we want to select Trusted Documents. And we can clear all trusted documents so they are no longer trusted. When you click on Clear, we just have one document, but if you had additional ones, it's going to clear them all, so none of them are going to be trusted. And if I say yes, then none of them are trusted, including the one that we're working on. Click OK, click OK. So when I close out of here and I open it back up, we get the warning again with the option to enable it. Now, for the sake of this training video, as far as working with macros, I don't want to be playing with enabling them every single time, so let me go back to File, Options, Trust Center Settings, to Macros, to say Enable All. And then click OK, click OK. Of course, when I close out of Excel, it will take effect when I reopen it again. I don't get the warning. Next, I want to go over the personal macro workbook. Remember, in our regular workbook, when you record a macro and you save it, it forces you to do a save as. Otherwise, if you don't save it into a macro enabled workbook with the extension M, then it deletes the macro. But with the personal macro workbook, when you're recording it or when you're setting up for record and you choose that option, it will store that macro into a hidden workbook. So every time you open up Excel, even the regular workbook, it will run macros from that regular workbook. So you don't have to save it as a macro-enabled workbook, but in the background, hidden somewhere, like let's pretend right here, is going to be that personal macro workbook storing all those macros. So let's go ahead and open up this regular workbook. Again, the workbook doesn't have a macro in it. To verify, click on the View tab, go to the Macros, click on the Macro button, no macros. Let's go ahead and close out. Come down here on the status bar and click on Record to begin. And let's call it, well, let's do something simple. Format. We can do the shortcut key, hold down the Shift key and hit the letter M for Control-Shift-M. And it wants to store in the personal macro workbook. If that doesn't come up, then click on the drop-down arrow and select it. And then just the description if you want to add a description. Format titles, and then click OK. It's now recording by the little stop button here. So let's go ahead with it selected, come up here and click on the Home tab and apply format to it, like the color, change the size. And that's good enough for me for this example. We'll go ahead and click Stop. And then when we come up here and click Save, is it going to force me to do a Save As? Click Save. It didn't. Why? Because we have a hidden workbook that has all the macros stored to it because we saved it to that personal workbook. So every time we open up Excel, it's going to bring up that personal macro workbook in the background. In fact, if you come up here and click on the View tab and you go to the window group, you see the Unhide. It's actually active, meaning that something's being hidden. What is it? Click on Unhide, and it's our personal macro workbook. So if I go ahead and click OK, it's up, and it's storing all the macros. So remember, we created a macro that says Format, so when I click on the View tab and go to Macros, there it is, Format. It's holding it for this other workbook right here, the regular workbook, or any workbook that you open up. Whether it's macro enabled or not, is going to pull it over from the, well, it's no longer hidden now, the personal macro workbook. So if I go ahead and close out of here and close out of there, and I save it, and I want to go ahead and open up Excel, like let's begin a new workbook. Let's go ahead and come over here and double click. Notice up here on the title bar, it's the personal macro workbook. Well, why is that pulling up? Well, because it's no longer hidden, and every time you open up Excel, it's got to pull it up so it can have the macros ready for your use. So if you unhide it, and you don't want to work in that workbook, then you have to come over here and click on File, go to New, create another workbook here so you can start from scratch, and then go ahead and do your changes in here and save and close out. But then we still have the personal workbook, the personal macro workbook open over here. And so what we can do is if you want it to go back into hiding, then click on the View tab and click on Hide. And then we can go ahead and close out of here. But the thing is that it says, do you want to save changes you made to the personal macro workbook? We don't want to save it to the one that we just opened up, but we want to save the personal macro workbook because we want it hidden every time we open up Excel. So save to that. The other one closes out. So when I come back up here, open up Excel, double click. Hey! Opens up Excel without the personal macro workbook, but it is hidden. Remember, the View tab. The Unhide feature is available because we have something that is being hidden in the background, and that's our personal macro workbook. Click Cancel. Now let's say that I don't want the personal macro workbook opening up every time I open up Excel. Well, deleting the macros from the personal macro workbook, either one or all of them, isn't going to prevent it from opening up. What you have to do is, let me go ahead and close out of here, is open up your computer, double click, go to the C drive, and drill down to the users, and then whatever username you logged in under as, like I'm logged in under training, double click on that, and there's app data. Now app data has a faded folder, meaning that by default it's something that you shouldn't be viewing at or looking in. So if you can't see it and you want to see it, then hit the Alt key on the keyboard to bring up the menu. Click on the Tools menu, go down to Folder Options, click on the View tab, and it's right here, Show Hidden Files, Folders, and Drives. By default, it'll say Don't Show, but we want to see it. Select it, click OK. Then you'll be able to see it. Double-click on that. Then go down to Roaming, double-click on Roaming. Then find Microsoft, double-click on Microsoft. Then find Excel. There it is, double-click. And there it is, Excel Start. Excel Start. So when you start Excel, double-click. There he is. He's hiding, our personal macro workbook. Go ahead and right-click, delete it, yes, close out, and when I open up Excel, double-click, go to the View tab. The Unhide command is no longer available to click on because there's nothing to hide. The personal macro workbook has been deleted. And by the same token, if you want to edit the macros in the personal macro workbook or just delete a few of them, you can unhide it, in which case you can go into the macros and make changes there if you'd like. Now another thing you can do that you may want to consider if you don't want a personal macro workbook, but you have some macros in some workbooks that you'd like in others, but not in all of them, you can copy your macros between workbooks. And to do that, well, I've got my workbook here. Let me go ahead and do a Save As. And save this as a macro-enabled workbook. There we go. XLSM, and we'll call it the empty macro workbook. Go ahead and click Save. And then to be able to copy it from the other workbook, let me go ahead and minimize this down to the taskbar. You have to open up the one that you want to copy from, so they both have to be open. So let's go ahead and open up our Macro Basics workbook. Double-click. And so now we have our empty one, then we have the one that contains the macro. And then what you can do is come up here, click on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on Macros, and you can see the macro, only one, Format Titles, click on Edit. Now we'll cover this a little bit more in the next training video about how to edit the macros, but right here I want to go over just how to copy from one workbook to the other. And you can see the workbook that I have is the empty macro, that's open, and also the workbook that I'm currently in, the one that contains the macro. And you can see the worksheets, Arizona, California, and so on for this workbook, and a module. Now the module is the actual macro. And when I come up here and I click to expand it for the empty macro workbook, and I expand the Microsoft Excel objects, it doesn't have it at all, no modules. So to be able to copy this module, that macro, over into that empty macro workbook, it's as simple as clicking and dragging and dropping it right on the Microsoft Excel Objects folder. When you let go, it creates the modules folder that when you expand, has the copy of the module 1 from the other workbook. And it's that simple. So all you have to do is go ahead and File to Close and Return. And we're in the original macro workbook, but if I go over to my empty macro workbook, and I come up here and click on Macros, hey, there it is, Format Titles, already in there. And it's got something that's ghosting over from the workbook. So if I click Cancel, let me just go ahead and save it, close out, and there's my empty macro workbook that we copied it over into. When I open it back up again, double-click, and then click on the View tab, and then click on Macros. You see how it doesn't have that second title there? It was ghosting over until I refreshed it by closing out of Excel and opening it back up. Then I just get my only macro that I copied over from the other workbook that just had that single macro. Let's go ahead and take it for a test drive. Close out. Let's type in some text here. Hit Enter. Select it. And then Control-Shift-M. Hey, it works. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel, get notified of the latest videos, and for only $2 a month, you can have access to all my Microsoft Office training videos.